So welcome everyone to this special Hanukkah shiur, this Hanukkah lecture that Marc Ashley has agreed to bless us with. You know, we started, Marc and I, a series in the Beit Midrash for holiday time learning. We had several friends of ours from the seminary and teachers from the community, but I was delighted that this year Marc agreed, starting back at Tisha B'Av, to offer us his reflections, his superbly organized shiurim about the Jewish holidays that he's chosen to take a look at. So it was a nice compliment to your Torah Shabbat Pei class, Marc. It's becoming a nice tradition for the community. So, you know, we'll still look sometimes, if you like, in Chavruta to find the folks we want to invite, but we're delighted that you've said yes and that we've got you as our teacher for this 8th night of Hanukkah. We're going to start with candle lighting. If you have a Hanukkah and would like to light with me, feel free. If not, my lights will be for all of us. And the full Hanukkah is waiting, so here we go. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa nisim la'avoteinu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. Hanerot halalu anu madlikim, hanerot halalu anachnu madlikim, al hanisim ve'al haniflot ve'al hateshuot ve'al hamilchamot she'asita la'avoteinu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh al yedei kohanecha hakedoshim v'chol shmonat Yemei Chanukah nerot halalu kodeshem ve'ein lanu reshut leishtamesh bahem ela lirotam bilvad kedei lehodot ulehalel shimcha hagadol al nisecha v'al niflotecha v'al yeshuatecha ma'otzor yeshuati lechanae l'shabeach tikon be'tefilati B'sham todah nizabeach, v'yetachim matbeach, mitzaram nabeach, az egmor b'shir mizmor, Hanukat hamizbeach, yevanim nikbetzu alai, azai v'yemei hashmanim, ufartzu chomot migdali, v'timu kol hashmanim, u'menotar kankanim, nase nes l'shoshanim, B'nei vina yemei shmona kavu shir urnanim. B'nei vina yemei shmona kavu shir urnanim. Happy Hanukkah all. Hanukkah Sameach. Chag Urim Sameach. So in the presence of our candles burning brightly, Marc, thanks again for leading our shiur this evening and inspiring us this 8th night of Hanukkah.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's my pleasure. Chag Haurim Sameach to everyone, and happy Festival of Lights, and that will be our focus this evening. I'll start off with just a few prefatory comments, and then I have a source sheet that the Rabbi will post on the screen, and we'll go through those texts and discuss themes related to light and candle lighting on Hanukkah. So let me I'll start off by, with some background that hopefully will clarify the trajectory of our discussion. First of all, Hanukkah is not a biblical holiday. It's not referenced in the Torah. It's not referenced in any of the books of Tanakh. So some people might construe it as a minor holiday with perhaps enhanced importance only in light of our Jewish integration in the modern world in light of Christmas and this winter holiday period. But I want to stress that's not the case. Despite the fact that it's not in Tanakh, It is not a minor holiday. It's not a holiday just for children, although we have trappings of trying to make it more enticing for the younger generation. But its themes are actually complex and nuanced, and I'm hoping we will explore some of those messages this evening, which really blend, I think we'll see the political and the spiritual on the one hand, on the other, the particularistic, meaning values and themes that are peculiar to Judaism, but also universalistic messages about our place as Jews in the broader world. We'll see that the essence of Hanukkah has in fact evolved over time. Since the rabbinic period, I believe my focus on light does correspond to what is perceived as the essence of the holiday. The lighting of the Chanukiah, the Hanukkah menorah, and the essence of light that the Chanukiah brings in our lives for these 8 days. But that wasn't always the essence of the holiday, but it has been for at least 1,500 years or so. And therefore, the character of light in the world as a broader theme has been at the heart of the holiday for many centuries. So despite the adaptable nature of Hanukkah over time, those themes about light and the significance of our candlelighting, I believe, have really been enduring and consequential in Jewish life and arguably even beyond the confines of the Jewish community. So we will explore the roots and resonance of Hanukkah's focus on light and candlelighting. What is it about the world and the human condition that Hanukkah is intended to convey to us, to teach us through our lighting of the Chanukiah? I'll finish this little background section by noting that candlelighting, what we just did with the Chanukiah, is the only mitzvah, the only commandment that is unique to this holiday. So we do other things, like say Hallel every day, but Hanukkah shares that routine with other holidays, as we know. This candlelighting of the Chanukiah is the only thing that no other holiday has. It is unique and special to Hanukkah. So I think it is incumbent on us to try to appreciate and understand, in addition to simply enjoying the spectacle of the lights. As I look at the screen, I can see the lights behind the rabbi, and I know there are Chanukiah lights behind me. And it's sort of fun and entertaining just simply to look at the lights. But what else are we supposed to learn from the candlelighting process, from simply seeing these lights in our lives? What are we supposed to take away from the experience, and how are we to construe its significance? So, Rabbi, with that background, why don't we start sharing the texts, please?
Just remind folks that if you want to see Marc beside the screen share that I will make as the speaker, you can choose in the upper right-hand corner, hover over the right-hand corner and choose speaker view. And you'll get the screen share plus Marc with the speaker view. Otherwise, you'll have to choose among 4 different settings to either increase or reduce the number of Zoom boxes you see on the screen alongside my screen share.
Okay, so as you can see in color, the name of this talk is The Essence of Hanukkah, Perspectives on Light and Lighting. So as we scroll down to the first text, I wanted to, right up front, establish the sort of pedigree, the status and significance of this mitzvah, of lighting candles. And there's no better place to turn to than Maimonides. This is the Rambam from his great code of Jewish law, the Mishnah Torah. It is from the section Maimonides combines in one category in separate chapters, but in one division of his code, the laws of both Purim and Hanukkah. And it's not inconsequential that he ties the two together. This is from the last paragraph of the last chapter of that division about Purim and Hanukkah. And I'll read a little bit of the Hebrew and then just read the English. Maimonides writes, Mitzvat ner Chanukah mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. V'tzarich adam lihizaher ba kedei lehodia hanes u'lehosif b'shevach ha'el v'hodaya lo al hanisim she'asa lanu. The precept, Maimonides writes, of lighting the Chanukah lamp is exceedingly precious. In the Hebrew, mitzvah chaviva hi ad me'od. That's very strong language that Maimonides uses to show how exceedingly treasured this mitzvah is. And one should carefully observe it in order to acclaim the miracle, ever praising and thanking God for the miracles which he has performed for us. And Maimonides will go on to show, in fact, how precious this mitzvah is to us, or should be to us. Even if one has nothing to eat except what he gets from charity, he should borrow or sell his garment to buy oil and lamps and light them. So this unique mitzvah of lighting the Chanukiah should not only be precious in the abstract, but we should in fact do almost anything at all costs to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. See that if one has only one coin and the Kiddush of the Shabbat, meaning the Kiddush that we say on Friday night and Shabbat afternoon, and drink wine. So if you only have limited money and you can only use that money to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush for Shabbat or lighting the Hanukkah lamp, he should have buying oil for lighting the Hanukkah lamp take precedence over buying wine for Kiddush of Shabbat. So as between those two mitzvot, Shabbat Kiddush and the expense of buying wine and the expense attached to buying oil and whatever utensils you need to light the Hanukkah lamp, the Chanukiah, Hanukkah takes precedence. Since they are both from the words of the scribes, meaning they're both rabbinic commandments, it is better to have the Hanukkah lamp take precedence as it contains a memorial of the miracle. So right up front, we see from Maimonides, this is an exceedingly precious commandment. I'm hoping that our discussion this evening will help explain and clarify why that's the case. It takes precedence even over a fairly seminal mitzvah of Shabbat. And we're really enjoined to do almost anything to be able to fulfill the commandment, which entails some expense and some prioritization of our resources if it comes to that. So that sort of sets the stage for this crucially important commandment, and I'm hoping our discussion will help clarify why that's the case. We move to the second text. This should look very familiar. Rabbi Bolton just chanted it for us. This is the first bracha that we say when we light the candles. We said a second bracha tonight. Only on the first night do we also say Shechianu. So we say 3 brachot the first night and 2 for the remainder of the holiday. And I want to point out 2 things that I think are notable about this bracha. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to light the Hanukkah candles. The first is, as I noted in my prefatory comments, Hanukkah is not a biblical holiday. There's no mention of it in the Torah or Tanakh, because in fact the events of Hanukkah, the underlying events of the Hashmonaim and the Syrian Greeks whom they fought, those events occurred after, certainly after the Torah, the events of the Torah, and likely after most of the Tanakh was canonized. So there's no reference in it to Hanukkah in our Bible. How can we possibly say that God commanded us to light the Hanukkah candles? How do we say the words Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, that God commanded us? And that is actually a very important and potent question that is raised and addressed in the Talmud. I'll give the quick answer is that there's a biblical verse, or 2 actually, biblical verses that are brought in the Talmud that establish the source, the roots of rabbinic authority to create additional obligations for us. And anchored in one or both of those texts, the rabbis derive the authority to create this commandment for us, and not unimportantly trace it back to God. So because it's anchored in a biblical verse, this post-biblical commandment can take on additional significance, although it's still a rabbinic ordinance. But I wanted to point that out because it really goes to the crux of issues relating to the oral law, the Torah Shebaal Peh, that I've always been interested in. The other thing I wanted to point out is this bracha sounds familiar because it corresponds to the bracha said over the candles of Shabbat, La'adlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, and on Friday night we say La'adlik Ner Shel Shabbat. I don't think it's clear liturgically which blessing came first. So it's not clear that this Hanukkah blessing was modeled on the Shabbat blessing. It could have been the other way around. What I want to focus on is in both cases, but particularly here, it's notable that Ner, candle or light, La'adlik Ner Shel Hanukkah, is in the singular. It's not in the plural. Tonight, we just lit 8 candles, plus the shamash. There are an aggregate number of many candles lit over the course of Hanukkah. It could have said, Asher kichanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu la'adlik neirot shel Hanukkah in the plural, but it did not. And my suggestion is, and I'm hoping this sort of to tease out this theme as we go along, that the focus on a single light in the singular highlights the singularity and purity of light more generally. So it's not just that we're commanded to light a bunch of candles in a certain manner, and we'll get to the significance of the candle lighting process itself. But the blessing, the bracha here, alerts us to the fact that put in the singular, we are focused on light, and not just lights, not just candles, but on the intensity and the purity of the light that emerges from the multiplicity of candles. If we move to the next text, this is also liturgy that Rabbi Bolton also just sang. And I know I say this in many of my talks, but if you want to know what Jews believe, look at the Siddur, at our liturgy more generally, or the Machzor. And here too, just like I pointed out something I think is notable about the bracha that we say about the candles, this passage as well, I think sheds light on the way we're supposed to perceive the lights of the Chanukiah. We kindle these lights on account of the miracles, the deliverance, and the wonders which you did work for our fathers by means of your holy priests. During all the 8 days of Hanukkah, these lights are sacred. So this affirms that these are holy lights. Neither, and this is what I want to focus on, neither is it permitted us to make any profane use of them. But we are only to look at them, in order that we may give thanks unto thy name for thy miracles, your deliverances, and your wonders. So there is no utilitarian functional purpose to the candles. They have great significance, and we're going to talk about their significance and thematic importance for us and for our lives. But they are to serve no other purpose in our homes other than to make us aware of the light that they are emitting. So we're directed to focus on simply looking at them and thinking about their importance, as opposed to using them for lighting purposes. You can't walk around your home or your apartment using the Hanukkah lamp as an additional light to read, for example. So they are the liturgical prescription is that these lights are evocative of themes that we'll discuss, but that they are self-sufficient. They are not to be used for any other purpose. We move to the next text, another liturgical portion of the Hanukkah davening, and we say the Al Hanisim both during the Amidah, every Amidah that we say during Hanukkah, and during the Birkat Hamazon as well. And again, I think we can learn something in particular about the holiday and about the lights, either directly or indirectly, by looking at the related liturgy. So this is in the context of our Modim prayers during the Amidah. These are, we thank you in English is in brackets because the Hebrew doesn't actually say it, but it's implicit in the context during the Amidah. We thank you, God, for the miracles, for the redemption, for the mighty deeds, for the deliverances, and for the wars that you performed for our fathers in those days of this season. And then it goes on in part to tell the story. It mentions Mattityahu, son of Yochanan the high priest. There's a little bit, I think, perhaps some confusion. Yochanan may not have been the name of the high priest at the time, but in any event, Mattityahu was at the center of the early events of the Hasmonean revolt, and his sons, including Judah the Maccabee, eventually led the successful rebellion against the Seleucid Greeks. This is in the year about 165 or so BCE. And what I wanted to point out is this text, Al-Hanisim, written sometime during the rabbinic period, certainly acknowledges the military victory. So it says, when the evil Greek kingdom rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and to turn them away from the statutes of your will, you in your abundant mercy stood by them in their time of distress, you defended their cause, you avenged them, etc. There is definitely a recognition of the military victory, and I don't mean to discount that at all. But I do mean to suggest that the military victory that the Hasmoneans won, their triumph over the greater army of the Seleucid Greeks, was not an end in itself. So just like the candles of the Chaya are supposed to be independent and self-sustaining, that we're not supposed to use it for another purpose, I think the rabbis actually did read into the military victory the fact that it was a premise of something larger. They spiritualized the military victory and were not satisfied with resting on the military miracle alone. So, for example, we don't celebrate Hanukkah with any sort of military parade or military rituals. Perhaps that was a feature of the original Hasmonean celebration, but over time, if there was any such component of the Hanukkah celebration, it disappeared. And in the italics, you can see, I'll read in Hebrew, Masarta giborim biyad chalashim v'rabim biyad me'atim u'tzme'im biyad tehorim v'sha'im biyad tzadikim v'zaydim biyad oskei toratecha. And what I want to point out is, in these poetic dichotomies, within that portion of Al-Hanisim, if you count, there are really two that are dedicated to the military victory. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, many into the hands of the few, and that's really become a proxy for the military victory. The Rabim Biyad Me'atim, those both, I think, refer to the military victory. But then it goes on to have three of these poetic dichotomies that are devoted to a more spiritual understanding of the miracle of Hanukkah. That God delivered defiled people into the hands of the undefiled, that's us, the wicked into the hands of the righteous, and then most significantly for the rabbis, and insolent sinners into the hands of diligent students of your Torah. And that sort of sums it up, that the spiritualization of the military triumph is that the practitioners and students of Torah won over the pagans in whose lives Torah is absent. And I think it's not unimportant that there are three such dichotomies that go to the spirituality of the miracle, and only two that are dedicated to the political nature of the Hanukkah experience. So Al-Hanisim certainly acknowledges the military victory, but it transitions to the purpose, the agenda, the utility of the military miracle, which is spiritual fulfillment of the dominion of Torah. So military triumph is not the end goal. And the rabbis will see transformed the Hasmonean military victory into something different. I'll also note there's no mention in Al Hanisim of the miracle of the oil. So this is a very important prayer that we say every day of Hanukkah. But this very important prayer doesn't even mention the miracle of the oil, the light for the menorah that we'll be focusing on tonight, and that we know is at the centerpiece of our holiday celebration these days and for the last 1,500 years. I'll also just point out something that Rabbi Bolton has emphasized during Morning Minyan over the last couple of weeks, but there are many commonalities between Hanukkah and Sukkot. I'm not going to address that issue, but the joy that we attach to Sukkot, we have a commandment for Sukkot, v'hayita ach sameach, that we should be especially happy then. Some of that is captured for Hanukkah as well. So the joyousness of Sukkot spills into our celebration of Hanukkah, and indeed, the observance of Hanukkah is modeled, as we'll see later, on the celebration of Sukkot. If we go to the next text, we'll see that I just wanted to compare it to the Al Hanisim that we say for Purim. This, I won't read the whole thing, but if you take a look, it's entirely about the physical threat that Jews experienced at the earlier time during the Persian Empire. Of Haman rose up against us and sought to kill us. The text is entirely about the physical peril that Jews at the time overcame. There's no mention of a spiritualization of the military victory. There was also a military victory in Megillat Esther with respect to the Purim story. So the two holidays of Purim and Hanukkah share that in common. There was a military fight, if you recall, near the end of the Megillah that recounts the Jewish victory on the battlefield or in cities, but through violence against the people who had in mind to annihilate them. But the Al Hanisim that we say on Purim has no reference to the spiritual interpretation of that military victory. It focuses simply on the physical threat. And I think through this comparison of the Al Hanisim text between the two holidays, we see that Hanukkah really has a complexity and nuance and subtlety that I think arguably is absent from the Purim story. So despite the fact that Megillat Esther is in the Tanakh and Hanukkah has no corresponding biblical text, I would argue that the themes of Hanukkah are somewhat more complex than those of Purim. Okay, so that establishes some of the liturgical backdrop to Hanukkah, to the candle lighting, and what has been important, at least during the sort of first stage of the Choshen. And I think correctly understood, there was an initial historical period of the celebration of Hanukkah that really didn't focus on the miracle of the oil and on the lighting. That focus and that theme on light and candle lighting emerged only later, and we will see that when it did. But the idea of the significance of light in the Jewish world has deep biblical roots, and I want to just establish some of them because they inform the significance and the sort of world-changing importance of the lighting of the Chanukiah during Hanukkah. In Bamidbar, in Numbers, it says, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you light the lamps, Ha'alotcha et hanerot el mul pnei hamnorah, ya'iru shiv'at hanerot. Let the 7 lamps give light at the front of the lampstand." Lampstand here is the translation of menorah. So, as we know, that there was a menorah, which was a 7-branched candelabrum in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle during the desert journey, and then later in the temple. both temples. So the menorah was there from the beginning, from really the beginning of the establishment of the community, the Israelite community during the desert wanderings. And Aaron and his priestly descendants had the key role with respect to the menorah. So let's go to see how Rashi interprets this word. The word above in the text number 6, ha'alotcha, as you go up to light the lamps of the menorah. Rashi says, why is the section treating the menorah, meaning here, in the text that we just read in number 6, put in juxtaposition with the section dealing with the sacrificial offerings of the princes of the different tribes? Rashi explains, and this is based on a midrash, because when Aaron saw the dedication offerings of the princes, he felt distressed because neither he nor his tribe was with him in the dedication. Whereupon, in response, the Holy One, blessed be he, God, said to him, by your life, your part is of greater importance than theirs, for you will kindle and set in order the lamps. Shata madlik umetiv et hanerot. So Rashi invokes this midrash to stress the importance and the stature of the lighting of the menorah, that God was able to comfort Aaron because Aaron was distressed. They didn't have a role to play in the sacrificial offering process in the desert. But God said, don't worry, you have a more important role to play. You'll be lighting the lamps of the menorah, which implicitly, at least, establishes the greater significance and priority of the menorah relative to the sacrificial offerings that Aaron was initially distressed that he wasn't participating in. So the Rashi is highlighting the importance of the lighting of the menorah. If we move on to the next text, I don't have an English translation. I'll read the Hebrew. This is Ramban Nachmanides on the same word in the book of Numbers, Ba'alotcha, that Aaron went up to light the lamps of the menorah. Lama nismacha farashat menorah lechanukat hansiim. So he asks the same question: why is this section about the lighting of the menorah juxtaposed to the offerings of the princes? And the Hanukkah here is the word used for the dedication of the tabernacle that was embodied through those offerings. Lidrosh, and Nachmanides takes the Rashi interpretation a step further. Lidrosh remez min haparasha al Chanukah shel neirot shayta babayit sheni al yedei Aaron uvanav retzoni lomar chashmonai kohen gadol uvanav. Nachmanides is actually saying there is a hint here in this verse, in this biblical verse in the book of Numbers, of the role and events that implicated the Hasmoneans many centuries later, that are post-dated. The revelation at Sinai, or thought in more sort of modern terms, the closing of the canon. Nachmanides is saying that the holiday Hanukkah essentially was suggested through these words, through the juxtaposition of the menorah and the Chanukat Hanasim, the dedication of the princes, that the Hasmonean the priests would later play an important role with respect to lighting of the menorah. So not only was Aaron comforted and compensated because kindling the lights of the menorah, God told him, were more important than the sacrificial offerings, but Aaron perhaps was put on notice that his descendants, many centuries later, would still have this important role to play with respect to lighting the menorah when they rededicated the temple after it had been defiled by the Syrian Greeks. And we know that our lighting of the Chanukiah has postdated the destruction of the temple. So even after the temple was no longer in existence, many centuries after the sacrificial offering system had become defunct. The priestly descendants of Aaron have this important role to play in lighting the menorah, and this, Nachmanides suggests, was even hinted at in the Torah. Okay, so that's a little bit of the biblical background. I wanted to bring this Talmudic text that refers back to the light of the menorah that is referenced in Bamidbar. This is from the tractate Shabbat in the Babylonian Talmud. And does God require the light of the menorah for illumination at night? Didn't the children of Israel, or all 40 years that they walked in the wilderness, walk exclusively by his light, the pillar of fire? Rather, and this is what I want to focus on, the Hebrew is Ela edut hi levaye olam shehashchina shora b'Yisrael. Rather, the lighting of the menorah is testimony to mankind that the divine presence rests among Israel. So this Talmudic text establishes the importance of the lighting of the menorah, that it is essentially the embodiment of the divine presence among Israel in our midst, that the light of the menorah is divine, supernal, eternal, and the menorah is evidence of God's presence and participation in Jewish history. Continuing that theme about the importance of light. So we've looked at light as emanating from the menorah, but light more broadly, from whatever source it emerges, is an important theme in certain prophetic writings. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is from Isaiah, and this text elaborates on the importance of light and its correspondence to the presence of God. I'll just read the third verse in Hebrew. V'halchu goyim la'orech u'malachim lenoga zarchech, and nations shall walk by your light, and kings by your shining radiance, which suggests that the light that is so important, that is evocative of God's presence in the world, is not peculiar to Jews. That it's not. It won't be confined as Jewish property. This light will be a source of enlightenment to the nations of the world, perhaps at some point in the far future. So this could be understood as a reference to the Messianic age, when the nations of the world will look to Jews as a source of guidance, that we will be a light unto the nations. And here it's meant sort of literally, that nations will look to us and gain enlightenment through our values and through the teachings of Torah. So here, I think one could argue that light is seen in the Messianic future as a source of redemption, a source of goodness, divinity, and hope for a better future. In the next text, so that was Isaiah. Rabbi, could we go to the next one? This is from the 4th chapter of Zechariah. And this was the Haftorah on Shabbat Hanukkah that we actually chanted in person in our sanctuary at Or Zarua. For those of us who were there, we heard this Haftorah. And it's chosen as the Haftorah for the Sabbath that falls during Hanukkah, I think for important reasons. I won't read all of this either, but this is probably the most elaborate and momentous description of the menorah in all of our biblical literature. So Zechariah has who is a prophet. The context here is that the Jews had returned from exile during the Persian period, and the community was involved in rebuilding, not just rebuilding the Torah, but really resuscitating, reviving their own community back in the land of Israel. And Zechariah has a vision of a menorah, all of gold, of a 7-branched candelabrum with 7 pipes, and on each side of the menorah are two olive trees, and there are these golden tubes that reflect the source of life from the menorah, and it translated into the renewal of the nation. The text references Zerubbabel, who was the political leader of the Jewish community at the time. They were not sovereign. They were really under the rule of the Persians, but they had limited sovereignty, and Zerubbabel was the community political leader. And in tandem with the religious leader, Joshua the high priest, the community was going to be revived, and the temple was going to be rebuilt. And this depiction of this golden menorah is resonant of this renewal of the community. But more broadly, and I think this is important, it goes beyond the bounds of this text that I have on the page. But Zechariah has a really a universalistic sense of eventual reconciliation of Jews and non-Jews, of peaceful cooperation and coexistence of the Jews with their neighbors. And so the renewal of the Jewish community will go hand in hand with reconciliation of the Jews with their neighbors. So the menorah here is a proxy, a symbol, not just for the rebuilt temple and the light that will flow from it, but I think also, and we'll get back to this theme, of a future time of peace that sort of resolves the tension between the particularism of the Jews and the universalism of the message of messianic peace. The menorah will be a conduit of that reconciliation and of that future peace. We move to the next text. This is a short text from Mishlei, from Proverbs, in the section of Ketuvim in the Tanakh, which suggests a transition to light in its connection to Torah. Kiner mitzvah Torah or b'derech chayim tochachot musar. For the commandment is a lamp, the teaching, meaning Torah, is a light. And this equation of Torah and light in the world, not just for Jews, but eventually for the world beyond the Jewish community, becomes an important theme in Jewish thought. And this close association between light and God's revelation, of divine revelation, I think is an important theme that becomes attached to Hanukkah as well. So the menorah, the lamp, and Torah as light become vehicles of enlightenment for us, and God willing, for the world at large, in the Messianic period as well. But the rabbis pick up on this idea of Torah as light in our lives and those we can influence. If we go to the next text, Rabbi, this is from the Babylonian Talmud, and I've been talking a little bit about the significance of light. This Talmudic text suggests that the importance of light is primordial in nature. So there's a really, and arguably, a primordial basis of Hanukkah. So we saw earlier, in an earlier text, about Nachmanides suggesting that Hanukkah was hinted at in the Torah. This Talmudic passage suggests that Adam, the first human being on earth, really established what we'll see is a holiday that looks a lot like Hanukkah, an 8-day celebration in the middle of winter, as a shield against the darkness. That sounds a lot like Hanukkah. I'll read it. The sages taught, when Adam, the first man, saw that the day was progressively diminishing, as the days became shorter from the autumnal equinox until the winter solstice, he said, "Woe is me! Perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me, and will ultimately return to the primordial state of chaos and disorder, to the tohu vavohu of Genesis. Adam's first experience of winter, the darkness that we know envelops us during winter, the early end of daylight. Adam didn't know what to make of it. And he thought, this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven, because it says in Breshit, and to dust shall you return. He arose and spent 8 days in fasting and in prayer. But once he saw that the season of Tevet, the winter solstice, had arrived, and saw that the day was progressively lengthening after the solstice, so as we know, the days start to get longer and there's more daylight that we can experience, Adam said, clearly the days become shorter and then longer, and this is the order of the world. He started to realize that this is part of the cycle of life, that it wasn't due to his misbehavior, but it was built into the natural cyclical routines of the world, that there are shorter days and longer days, there is darkness, and then there is light. He said, clearly the days become shorter and then longer, this is the order of the world. He went and observed a festival for 8 days. So Adam established a festival that sounds a lot like Hanukkah. Upon the next year, he observed both these 8 days on which he had fasted on the previous year, and these 8 days of his celebration as days of festivities. We actually had instituted both 8 days of fasting or mourning for the darkness and 8 days of celebration of the newfound light. Adam established these festivals for the sake of heaven, but they, the Gentiles of later generations, the Talmud probably has the Romans in mind, established them for the sake of idol worship. So the pagan celebrations and the rabbis probably had Christian holidays in mind as well, had idolatrous purposes in mind. But here we see that the rabbis envisioned Adam as establishing something like Hanukkah at the beginning of creation. And again, I think it's not inconsequential that Adam's establishment of a holiday that looks a lot like Hanukkah had nothing to do with Jewish particularism. Again, I don't mean to discount Jewish particularism, but this sourcing of the Hanukkah celebration really is universalistic in nature. That it's about the human experience of darkness and the fear, insecurity, and anxiety that attaches to our experience of winter. Just imagine what it was like for early human beings who didn't know what the darkness really intended, or what the consequences of the darkness were for them, and imagine the anxiety that would attach to their experience of that darkness, and the happiness, the joyousness that would accompany their recognition that the darkness at some point would recede, would retreat, that darkness was not a perennial feature of our experience, but that light would prevail, at least for portions of the year. And by the way, I think this really has sort of cutting edge resonance for us now during this pandemic period. I think this Talmudic passage and others we'll see give us hope in the cyclical nature of renewal, that darkness is not permanent, that it will recede at some point and light will emerge in the wake of the darkness. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the significance of light. Here's a primordial reference to the initial experience of darkness and light. If we go to the next passage, we will get back to Hanukkah. So I want to tie in our perceptions of Hanukkah and the candle lighting process to some of the themes that we've talked about. This is a famous passage from the Babylonian Talmud, from Tractate Shabbat. It's notable that there's no separate tractate about Hanukkah. The rabbis placed their discussions of the laws of Hanukkah within the framework of the laws of Shabbat, and that was intended to highlight some of the commonalities, and obviously one of the things they share in common is the kindling of lights. This passage is a striking one. It's my Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah? This question, by the way, does not come at the beginning of the discussion of Hanukkah. It comes in the aftermath of a long discussion of the laws of Hanukkah. We'll actually see them. I put these texts out of order just to start with this portion about this striking question of the rabbi saying, what is this holiday all about? This question is not asked about other holidays. It's not asked about Passover or Sukkot or even of Purim, which is a later holiday that the rabbis could have been curious about its origins as well. But the rabbis are asking, again, after discussing the particular specific laws of Hanukkah, they sort of rouse themselves and stop themselves and say, wait a minute, what is this holiday all about? And the Talmud gives an answer. The sages taught on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8, one may not eulogize or fast. And what is the reason for this celebration? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest. And there was sufficient oil there to light the candelabrum for only one day. A miracle occurred and it lasted 8 days. And that's why the holiday was established. Now, this reference to the oil, to the miracle of the oil that was sufficient for only 1 day but lasted for 8, this is really the first reference to the miracle of the oil. So this text is, let's say, from the 5th or 6th century. It may have roots in earlier centuries. But as we saw earlier, the Al Hanisim prayer did not mention the miracle of the oil. And that's why I think it's accurate to say there was an initial stage of the Hanukkah celebration or observance that didn't have anything to do with a miracle of oil. And this, I'm not suggesting the miracle didn't happen, but it certainly wasn't the focus of the celebration. And only later did the rabbis make it the central feature of our Hanukkah celebration. And it is important to understand the context. When these Talmudic texts were written, there was no longer any temple. So the question, what is Hanukkah, can perhaps be better understood as why Hanukkah? Why are we celebrating this holiday that goes back to the rededication of the temple, the Second Temple, when the temple doesn't exist anymore? For these rabbis who lived in a post-temple world, they had to make sense of the continuing relevance and validity of Hanukkah in the absence of the temple that the holiday used to focus on. So a rebranding of Hanukkah to some degree emerged that focused on the miracle of the oil lasting 8 days. So Hanukkah evolved. Hanukkah over time, and this is the most important text that references the miracle of the oil. Hanukkah over time became, through the light that lasted 8 days rather than a single day, became a symbol of Jewish resilience and continuity, which was a very useful inspirational message for Jews through the subsequent centuries as Jews faced distress and denigration during their centuries of exile. This message of Hanukkah, of the light, the miraculous light, lasting longer than it was supposed to, became a symbol of Jewish continuity and survival in the midst of exile in this post-temple world in which the rededicated altar no longer was there. So the rabbis had to transition to a different focus to preserve and sustain the thematic resonance of Hanukkah, and they invoked this miracle of the oil to highlight Jewish resilience and survival through the centuries. I'm going to conclude with this last portion of my talk, focusing on some of the particular laws of Hanukkah and of the candle lighting process. So we focused on light, and light, I just suggested, is of the Hanukkah lamp, is suggestive of Jewish resilience and continuity in periods of darkness. The candle lighting process is also itself evocative of certain themes. So in text number 15, it says, Tan Rabbanan mitzvat Chanukah ner ish uveito. V'hamahadrin ner lechol echad ve'echad v'hamahadrin min hamahadrin. It goes on to recite this famous debate between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel that I'll explore in just a moment. But I want to point out, this, if you're not familiar with this text, I'm hoping you do find it surprising. It is, what it says is, the mitzvah of Hanukkah is that every person and his household is supposed to light the candles of the Chanukiah, ner ish uveito. And by the way, that implies that the lighting of the Chanukiah, of the candles, is really sort of a household mitzvah. It's for the household to do. There are very few, if any, other mitzvot that are like that. That of course, particular people have to perform it, but the household has to have a Chanukiah lit. And I'm hoping you think it's surprising that this is saying that the default rule is that each day you just have to light one candle or one light per household, and it's only for the mahadrin, the people who are very meticulous, that they light a candle for each person in the household, and then a further layer of meticulousness, of piety, for the mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, the most meticulous among us, is that we light more than one candle per night. So the default rule is not what we do today. What we do today corresponds to the law governing, or the law applicable to the mahadrin min ha-mahadrin, the most meticulous contingent among us. And it is there, within that group, that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel have their famous debate. Beit Hillel, we practice according to Beit Hillel, where we light one candle on the first night, and we increase the number of candles for each succeeding night. Beit Shammai, I'm going to address Beit Shammai's position in just a moment, but Beit Shammai's view is that we start on the first night with 8 candles, and then we reduce the number every night until on the 8th night we only have 1 candle. But it is not that with respect to this precious commandment of lighting the Chanukiah, lighting, creating the lights of the Hanukkah menorah, that the default rule is in this Talmudic passage is not what we do today. We make this a precious commandment in part by taking on the obligations that this passage is telling us only the most meticulous among us want to do. So what we do now, our current practice, reflects not just the common hidur mitzvah, the beautification of the mitzvah, but is actually embracing the most meticulous position reflected in this Talmudic passage. So it's sort of a built-in beautification of the mitzvah in what we do and what Jews have done for many centuries. I want to spend just a couple moments on this famous debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. I'm not going to read it all, but one of the 2 reasons given for Beit Hillel, the practice that we implement in our communities over the last number of centuries, at the end it says, "De Beit Hillel de ma'alin ba'kodesh ve'ein moridin," that we always elevate in holiness and we don't decline or decrease, go down in holiness. And so we light more candles as the holiday goes on. But I just for a moment, I'd like to do a little bit of a thought experiment and try to imagine what it would be like if we had adopted Beit Shammai's view. And by the way, the Talmud tells us that arguably Beit Shammai's views were sharper and deeper than those of Beit Hillel, that we generally follow the view of Beit Hillel, but there was a lot of merit to the views of Beit Shammai that were not adopted in current practice, and it's only in the Messianic period that we will embrace Beit Shammai's views that perhaps make more sense. So I'd like to just think for a moment, how does it make more sense that if we had adopted Shammai's view that we should start with 8 on the first night and end up with 1? Let me give a couple of suggestions, but I think it's worthwhile for you to think about this, either in our post-talk discussion, our Q&A period, or afterwards. Think about what it would be like in our lives if the view of Shammai were our practice. A couple of rationales that I think might make sense in favor of adopting Beit Shammai. One is just a matter of practical reality, that the view of Beit Shammai that we decrease the number of candles used each night is that better corresponds to the reality, the practical reality of the miracle. The oil obviously was cleaning in quantity over the 8 days. It started out with more at the beginning of the holiday, or the 8-day period, and ended with less. So in some respects, the view of Shammai corresponds to the flame growing weaker over time. But I think that it is at least useful in my mind to think about what it would be like if on the last night of Hanukkah we had a single candle remaining. And it goes back to what I mentioned about the bracha, the blessing that we say over the candle lighting, lahadlik neir shel Hanukkah, that it's in the singular. And I think that is meant to evoke the singularity, the purity, the intensity of the light experience, our experience of the light. And on the last night of the holiday, perhaps focusing on a single candle would correspond to that intensity, that purity, that singularity that I think we're meant to experience in our encounter with the light night. So I'll say something for a moment in favor of the rationale of Hillel. Hillel's position tracks what I think could be construed as the escalation of hope, and not the practical reality of the miracle that Shammai's position corresponds to, but in the possibility of growth and progress of the miracle, that our perception of the awesomeness of the miracle actually grows, despite the fact that the oil decreased, the fact that it continued to last with each passing day, an additional day beyond its capacity, should have been the source of wonder at the miracle. And so our sense of the miraculous actually grows through time. And so it's Hillel's position is not tethered to the diminishing flame, but I think it can be argued that it's tied to the escalation of our sense of the miraculous. So I think there are good rationales for both opinions, and both I think have a certain useful way of thinking about both the miracle and the significance of light that is at the center of it. Rabbi, let's in the service of time, let's just skip the next item. That text gave some source, I think, for the corresponding positions of Hillel and Shammai. But I want to end with just a few texts that go to these particular rules about the candle lighting process and what themes and lessons they teach us. This is from the same context in the Babylonian Talmud. Tanu Rabbanan ner Hanukkah mitzvah lahanicha al petach beito mibachutz. That it is a mitzvah to place the Hanukkah lamp at the entrance to one's house on the outside so that all can see it. We know that there's the concept of pirsuma nisa, that we're supposed to publicize, advertise the miracle, which, by the way, reinforces the notion that Despite the particularism of our Jewish experience about the events, the underlying events of Hanukkah, it has a universal resonance and significance that should make us want to share its messages and its themes with the outer world. We are directed to place the Chanukiah outside our houses. And in some places I know in Israel, but I think even in Manhattan, some people do this, that where it's safe to do it, so that where there are no anti-Semites around the corner who might do us harm, you're supposed to publicize the miracle by placing the Hanukkah menorah outside so that people can see it. And, in our apartment buildings, we put it on our windowsill so that our neighbors can see the light emanating from our celebration of the holiday. If we continue the next text, number 18, Rabbah said, it is a mitzvah to place the Hanukkah lamp within the handbreadth adjacent to the entrance. And then it goes on, and where? On which side does he place it? There's a difference of opinion on the right or the left, but I want to focus on the last part. Behilchata mismol, kadesha tehei ner Hanukkah mismol umezuzah miyamin. So you're supposed to put it in the entrance. So again, optimally, it should be outside at the sort of entryway, the portal to your home. But within the portal, one side will be the candles of Hanukkah, and the other side will have the mezuzah attached to it. And that in combination, the combination of menorah and mezuzah, I think is a powerful metaphor for the idea that the Jewish home, and candle lighting is a home-based commandment. It can be done at shul, but we're supposed to do it in our homes, and it is the obligation of the household. And it is noteworthy that the entryway to the Jewish home that is supposed to be sort of a miniature temple has on one side the mezuzah, which it literally embodies or encases the words of the Shema. So that's a symbol for monotheism. And on the other side, it should have the lights of the Chanukiah that are emblematic of Jewish survival, of Jewish resilience, and of Jewish continuity. So the Jewish home becomes the literal embodiment of Jewish values. On the one hand, of monotheism, on the other hand, of Jewish continuity and Jewish resilience. If we go to the next text, when we think of pictures of the menorah, one of the pictures that unfortunately comes to our minds is the picture of the engraving of the menorah on the Arch of Titus in Rome, that gave evidence to the Romans of their destruction of the temple, their taking away of the temple vessels, including the menorah, and of their victory march out of Jerusalem after its destruction. This text is from a non-Jewish historian, a German historian of ancient Rome, but I think it's very telling. He writes, if we descend from the Arch of Titus toward the Tiber and wander through the Roman ghetto, we notice the 7-branched candelabrum engraved here and there on the walls of the inhabited Jewish houses. It is the same design which we just now saw on the Arch of Titus, but here, in the Jewish ghetto, it is alive as the functioning symbol of the Jewish religion. And to this day, there dwell in these houses descendants of the Jews whom Titus once led in triumph. Beneath the figures of the temple vessels which Titus once brought to Rome, the Jewish people, still persisting, still undestroyed, offers up its prayers to the ancient God of Jerusalem. The Jewish God has proved more powerful than the Capitoline Jupiter. I found this text in a lecture by Rabbi Meir Soloveitchik. I want to give him credit for this, but I think it's a really interesting observation by a non-Jew of the fact that Jewish survival has proved the falsity of Titus's apparent triumph, that we Jews have in fact lasted far longer, far beyond the demise of the Roman Empire, that the Arch of Titus still exists, but the Roman Empire does not, that the menorah that Titus took away from Jerusalem and in his march back toward Rome still exists in real concrete form in Jewish homes, as we light the candles and as in our prayers we face Jerusalem, and thankfully in our times a rebuilt Jerusalem. So I think the image here that is invoked by this non-Jewish historian is very compelling. I'm going to end with a couple of final texts. I want to end, as I started, with Maimonides in the Mishnah Torah. This is literally the last passage in Maimonides' discussion of the laws of Purim and Hanukkah. And I think nothing in Maimonides, just like nothing in the Torah, nothing in Maimonides is arbitrary. And I think he purposefully and consciously ended his legal discussion of the laws of Purim and Hanukkah with this passage. If a poor person must choose between Sabbath lights and Hanukkah lights, so before we were talking about Shabbat Kiddush wine, but now it's Shabbat lights. If a poor person must choose between lights and Hanukkah lights, or between Sabbath lights and wine for Kiddush, the lighting of his home takes priority. So remember, the Hanukkah lights can't be used to light the home. They have to be enjoyed simply for their own existence. They are self-sustaining. But the Shabbos lights are there and can light up the home. And that lighting of the home is of utmost precedence or priority, so as to sustain peace in the house, to create shlom bayit, which is a phrase that we often use. Since even the divine name was erased, and this is a reference to the oath of the Sota, the suspected adulteress in the Torah, and if the Sota, the suspected adulteress was found innocent, then even the divine name could be erased as part of that process to make peace between a jealous husband and his wife. So to promote shlom bayit between a husband and wife, even the divine name could be erased. And then Maimonides ends this whole section of the Mishnah Torah by saying this: great is peace, since the entire Torah has been given to create peace in the world, as it is written, D'racheha darchei noam v'chol netivoteha shalom. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. I don't think it's accidental. I'm certain it's accidental that Maimonides decided to end his discussion of the laws of the Hanukkah lighting with a reference to the fact that the goal, the agenda, the purpose, the utility of our candle lighting process is to advance the cause of peace in the world. And again, this is really a universalistic message of Maimonides. It's not, peace is not confined to the Jewish community, but he refers to the fact the entire Torah has been given to create peace in the world. So our lighting of the Hanukkah lamps has the purpose of hopefully, with God's help, eventually creating a period of reconciliation and peace globally, so that the experience of Hanukkah can become manifest and influential in the world beyond the Jewish community. That Shlom Bayit can lead to Shlom Ha'olam, the peace of the household can lead to the peace of the world. And I think Maimonides is suggesting that that's the ultimate purpose of our focus on the Hanukkah lights and the candle lighting process, to promote through Jewish continuity and resilience to reach a stage of prosperity, stability, and peace in the world at large. I want to end with one last text that I didn't include here, but I will read from. We didn't have time, or I didn't have time, to incorporate really anything about the Zionist perspective on Hanukkah in the modern age. In light of the reestablishment of the State of Israel, Hanukkah has taken on a new resonance, and Part of that encompasses the fact that the political or the military dimension of Hanukkah has been re-emphasized. It makes sense that in a politically sovereign Jewish state, that the Hasmonean military victory would gain new relevance. And in that light, I want to read you a text, a portion of an essay by Theodor Herzl. So one of the founders of Zionism, modern Zionism. This essay was called "The Menorah," and it was from the late 19th century. He writes about a Jew. I don't know if this is necessarily autobiographical, but it's about a Jew who had sort of discovered elements of his tradition. He writes of that Jew, in previous years he had let the festival which for centuries had illuminated the marvel of the Maccabees with a glow of candles pass by unobserved. Now, however, with the renewal of his Jewish identity, he used it as an occasion to provide his children with a beautiful memory for the future. An attachment to the ancient nation was to be instilled early in these young souls. A menorah was acquired, and when he held this 9-branch candelabrum in his hands for the first time, a strange mood came over him. In his remote youth, in his father's house, such little lights had burned, and there was something intimate and homelike about the holiday. This tradition did not seem chill or dead. The custom of kindling one light with another had been passed on through the ages. And I'll conclude with this portion. With such thoughtful occupation the week passed. There came the 8th day of the celebration of Hanukkah, on which the entire row of lights is kindled, including the faithful 9th candle, the shamash, which otherwise serves only to light the others. A great radiance shone forth from the menorah. The eyes of the children sparkled. For our friend, this renewed Jew, the occasion became a parable for the enkindling of a whole nation, which suggests the Zionist renewal. First one candle. It is still dark and the solitary light looks gloomy. Then it finds a companion, then another and yet another. The darkness must retreat. The young and the poor are the first to see the light. Then the others join in, all those who love justice, truth, liberty, progress, humanity, and beauty. When all the candles are ablaze, everyone must stop in amazement and rejoice at what has been wrought. And no office is more blessed than that of a servant of light. Thank you.
Koach, Marc. Lots of applause from all the Zoom boxes, I'm sure. Yishar Koachs coming from every direction. I speak for everyone. You know, the power of Hanukkah to really kindle those kind of lights of victory that we feel in the modern age because of the land of Israel and the idea that the Maccabees were embracing of their Jewish power really, I think, is expressed by that Herzl text. I was in knowing that Avodah Zarah, the Talmud, brings us an example of Adam and Eve, who celebrate the 8-day festival, and you're finding universal themes of from darkness to light. Where do you think that situates us in our time as needing to either amplify one, both, or is it both and how do we accomplish that in a world that sometimes needs more thrust for Jewish particularism, as the Maccabees stood up and fought for our language, our Sabbath, our clothing, our names, our calendar, our way of life. And we seem to be kind of potentially even assimilating into this, what I will call New Age religion, which is a religion of light and not of mitzvot. Should we be so interested in amplifying the universal, or should we really hit the particularism even harder than we are as we think about our Hanukkah celebrations?
Rabbi, I think we should do both. So I'm a huge fan of Jewish particularism. So that's why I included text about the particularities, the specifics of the halachic details about candlelighting, because those are crucially important. And nothing I said was meant to discount or denigrate the particularism of our observance of Hanukkah also. So I think that the universalistic messages don't necessarily have to come at the expense of the Jewish particularism. The texts that we looked at that have universalistic resonance are from a Jewish perspective. So the idea is that the themes and values embodied in our celebration of Hanukkah can ultimately, eventually, have an impact on the broader world. That these values, the significance that we attach to light, to the candlelighting process, don't permanently have to be confined to the Jewish community. We should embrace our particularity, but over time, I think the Jewish notion is that over time, we hope that these Torah values will spread beyond ourselves. So I think that balance between embracing and encouraging our particularism can be paired with productively with universalistic messages that are native to Jewish thought.
Great, thank you. I think we'll open it up to questions and comments. I'll try to recognize folks as you raise your hands. And if you could come off mute in order to ask your question and share a thought, and then go back on mute to let Marc answer, that would be best for our sound system here. Yes, Art.
Three things, two observations and a question. Can I be heard?
Yes, you can. Go ahead.
No, I'm okay. The observations are what a terrific presentation this was, Marc. Quite comprehensive and indeed an extraordinary experience, I'm sure, for all of us. The other observation is I'm so happy that as an acharon, that our ketubah, which a sofer did just for Evelyn and me, shows me lighting the candles, and it resonates. The question that I have is concerning the fact that you're quite correct in asserting that the text of the Tanakh does not recognize Hanukkah per se. But I'm wondering what influence, if any, First and Second Maccabees of the Apocrypha might have had in any of the observations that you made.
So just so that everyone is on the same page, the two books of Maccabees are not part of the Jewish canon. They are, in fact, part of the Catholic biblical canon. So they have sacredness in other traditions. The decision was made not to include them in the Jewish canon. That doesn't mean that they're not significant. The first book of Maccabees, my understanding is really the best eyewitness account of what happened during the Hasmonean revolt and wars. So if nothing else, they are useful historically. And it is, the way it related to my presentation was that the books of Maccabees don't mention the miracle of the oil. So the miracle of the oil, lasting 8 days, was a feature of the what I call the later rabbinic rebranding of the holiday. And I think the two books of the Maccabees reflect the initial stage of the celebration of Hanukkah, that it was modeled and had a lot in common with Sukkot. It was full of song and praise. It did encompass military victories that we Jews then and now should be proud of. But that over time, a sort of second stage of celebration of the holiday emerged that really postdated and to some degree superseded the narrative in the book of Maccabees. Again, it's not as if, it's not that the rabbis didn't recognize the military victories. They are referenced in Al-Hanisim as well. They just put a different spin, a different emphasis, I think, on what was important about the events of Hanukkah. That the miracle victories recounted in the two books of Maccabees were great wonders of God, but they placed God at the center of those events, and that additional themes of the miraculous nature of God's intervention in history emerged in rabbinic texts. So the books of Maccabees are important historically. I would note, in doing research for this talk, I learned that the first century historian Josephus, who's a famous Jewish historian of the first century, refers to Hanukkah as the holiday of lights, which seems to reference some idea of the miracle of the oil, but he doesn't reference the miracle, and he says that he doesn't know why it's called the holiday of lights. Or at least he says he's not certain about the reason. So I think there definitely was an evolution in the conception of the holiday, of the significance of lights in the holiday. That the significance increased over time, and all of us should read the books of Maccabees because they recount the events close in time to their actual occurrence, and I think they're fairly trustworthy historical artifacts that talk about military victories that were important then. And as the rabbi noted, and I try to suggest, with my Herzl passage, in the context of the modern state of Israel, the military victories become even more consequential.
Others? I'll just mention for a future time that there are some new questions about light and fire and the word mehedrin that Chama Friedman has discussed in its relationship to a festival of lights of some sort in the Persian theater. And so that the Zoroastrians also had their own festival of lights. We often hear generally that people have these different festival of lights going on in the wintertime to parallel this kind of theme that is brought forward in the passage from Avodah Zarah that Marc shared on page 8 of the Talmud. But there's a question as to whether or not there wasn't already a festival of lights based on Jews who were left in the exile back in the 8th century BCE, 6th century BCE, and already had adopted some type of winter light festival. That is available out there online if this kind of thing interests you. Integration of ritual practices from other cultures or from the universalistic standpoint that, again, I'll go back to and Marc had emphasized with page 8 of Avodah Zarah. It makes it so fascinating to think about how we do particularize the universalist approach to these themes like darkness and light. Adam and Eve are also known as the first ones to make Havdalah, which we said the other night at a Saturday night Havdalah event. And they took 2 flints and they rubbed them together and they made a spark and they made the first Havdalah happen. And then we made it into a fully braided candle, uniquely particular ceremony of Havdalah among the Jewish people. An invitation to all those learning tonight, if you want more context about what's happening in Avodah Zarah, to understand where that comment comes from and the balance between particularism and universalism, either watch the recordings of this year's Talmud class, where we are learning Masechet Avodah Zarah in the first chapter of Masechet Avodah Zarah, or come Wednesday nights and join the class anytime, and you'll get some of these themes that come out: particularism versus universalism, Judaism and Jewish identity versus relationships with others and othering ourselves for our own benefit or feeling like people are out there different from our own traditions and the like. Marc, relate again to some of the halachot about Hanukkah and their potential power. Do you think that people, if they are in New York City, could really get a better sense of the holiday by figuring out how to place their menorahs in the windows? What other details of the particular way we celebrate could be exciting? I like the thought experiment of going down to one and focusing on it. Are there other rituals that you think are particularly powerful in creating a holiday spirit? With this we'll end.
I can tell you that it's a source of annual entertainment and interest in our apartment. We not only put our Chanukiot on our windowsills, but we try to find as many Chanukiot in our neighbors' windows as we can find. So, seeing, and I'll be honest, I'm always disappointed that we don't find more. I know that there are a lot of in these apartment buildings in our neighborhood, and too few of the windowsills have a Hanukkah light kindling in them. So, sort of trying to observe in the outside world, publicizing the miracle through our own activity, but trying to see how many fellow Jews are doing the same is always of interest. Another I thought about exploring, but I didn't because we wouldn't have had time. But the songs of Hanukkah are really fascinating. Some of them really do amplify some of the themes that we talked about tonight. And in the singing of those songs, I think we can live out some of the messages of Hanukkah. If you think about not just the Hebrew ones, by the way, "Light One Candle" by Peter Yarrow. Some of these really do correspond, I think, quite effectively to some of the themes that we talked about. So singing those songs, I think, is another way to live out the lessons of Hanukkah.
Great. So we now know what we're going to do next year. I won't put you alone on the spot. I'll agree. We'll do together a Songs of Hanukkah exploration and do some singing and do some looking at the texts and their history. And so let's plan on it already. We don't need the outside invitations to flow when we have you to guide us in our learnings for the holidays. Marc, Yishar Koach, really, thank you for the serious investment it took to prepare and all you taught us tonight.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah to everyone.
Happy Hanukkah. Yishar Koach.
Next year together.
Amen.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Right.
That's the message.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yishar Koach.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Marc.